Okay, now Caroline's put this wonderful little tutorial together for typesetting. It's actually a bit of a quiz as well as a tutorial. So I'm going to hand over to Caroline. So everybody get your typography brains on, and let's get into some typesetting.
Yeah, just to introduce what we're doing here, we do see a fair amount of fairly common mistakes with students typesetting, and I think that typography tends to be often overlooked, just the fact that it's the last thing that people think about when they're putting their design together. And really, I would recommend that it's the first thing that you think about when you put your design together, because you can have the most amazing imagery and illustrations, but if your typesetting is poor, then immediately that will let down your design. So particularly for not in digital imaging, because there's no typesetting needed in that, but when you get onto the pre-press assessment and visual design assessment and layout and production assessment, there is typesetting involved in that. And for the Cert 4s, complex pre-press, web design and digital media, there is typesetting needed, and it needs to be well thought out, and it needs to be just considered. And it really isn't rocket science, a lot of the things, and just simple little changes can make a huge difference. For example, here we've got two bodies of text, one on the left and one on the right. It's an extract from the same amount of text. Obviously, the one on the left has got more text on it. However, I know if I had these two pages in front of me, I know which one I would be my eye would be drawn to go and read. There's not a lot of difference between what's happened there as far as how it's been set, but there's just considerations have been made that make a huge difference. And we're going to go through and having a look at common mistakes that we see with student examples, and just so you have these in the back of your mind when you are doing any typesetting as to how perhaps you can change the look of your typesetting with very, very simple considerations. So I'm going to show you a slide, and I'll just hazard a guess as to what you think might be the thing that could correct it. And if you don't know, that's fine. If you do, just put it in the chat area. I won't sort of have people putting their hand up, and otherwise we might be here all night. But if you do have an idea as to what you think could work to correct the issues, then put your hand, type it in the chat area, and we'll see. So this one here, I've used dummy text, which is lorem ipsum. For those that don't know, lorem ipsum is a fairly bog standard placeholder text, and you can grab that from the web. And if you are having to do any typesetting on a document that you haven't been given the text for, then lorem ipsum is a good placeholder text. Line spacing from Liz, line spacing from Hazel. And Emma, well done Emma, she's used the correct terminology there. Leading or line spacing. Line spacing, leading when you're a designer is probably the word that you can get into your head, but it pretty much it means line spacing as well. So for Hazel and Liz, well done too. Line spacing needed on this particular one is way too tight, and if you look on the next one, you can see here that the same amount of text, but increased leading or line spacing has made that a lot more readable. So for large blocks of text on a page, making it makes it easier for readers to follow the lines of text without losing their place. And too little can cause a very cramped feeling. So you know, I know that often you've been given the amount of text that has to fit into a design, and you've got this beautiful illustration and you've given this tiny little bit of room that's going to be for the text, and and so you're having to squish it in and squish it in and squish it in. My advice would be to re-change your illustration, to change things so that the actual text has got some room, because if you squish your text in, it's just going to let your whole design look pretty poor. So thinking about line spacing and making sure that things have got nice amount of space between it makes things look a lot better. Okay, so the next one here, this is a bit trickier, but I'm not, if anyone can have a think about what perhaps is wrong with this one. Again, something we see a fair amount of as well. So it doesn't matter if you're not sure. It's only slightly out, but when you see the two side by side, you'll be able to see. Okay, I'll move on. So no one's having a guess with this one. That's okay. This one here is tracking. So the tracking on this one is too tight. On the top amount of text, it's got way too tight tracking. And tracking is the letter spacing, so the spacing between each letter. And on this one here, especially if you had a lot of text to read, you would find that fairly hard going after a while to read a lot of body text which has got such tight letter spacing or tracking. So to just pull out your tracking slightly on large body text can just increase things and just make it a lot more pleasant to read. So that one was tracking. This one, what do you think needs to be sorted out on this one? Woo, well done, Liz. Kerning. So the kerning on this one is wrong. So you can see that, and often students will get tracking confused with kerning. So tracking is, like we've just seen, the letter spacing of an entire amount of body text. Kerning is really only used on headers or subheadings where you've got text that you've one word or a few words as a heading, and things need sorting out. So you can see here. Now, never rely on the default kerning that comes when you type. It will often need playing around with, particularly if you've done all caps as well. So if you've got a header that is made and you've put it in all caps, you'll find that things don't look so good. Whereas if you start to just sort out the spacing out between letters, and you can get a much more pleasant look to your header. There's a really good little activity on kerning, and maybe Steve might be able to find it quickly and put the URL into here, and you can have a play and you get a score, and it's a little bit addictive actually, to be honest, but to try and get the best score that you can on having a play with kerning, and it really does hone your skills as far as kerning is concerned. So well done, Liz, Jade and Gemma, for getting kerning. Okay, next one, again a little bit more difficult, because it's obviously, what are we trying to get at with this one? Yeah, we did put it on Facebook once as well. It is actually an activity in the skill set as well, but so font could be font. So this one here, too small, could be, but what we're trying to get at with this one is about having lengthy lines of text. So reading long lines of type can really cause eye fatigue, and so because you're actually forced to sort of, your eye is forced to move right across the page, and really you're trying to keep your lines of text to about 50 to 60 characters long. So splitting your long lines of text into 2 columns can certainly make it a lot more readable. Okay, so anybody got, and this one we see an awful lot of actually, so anybody got any ideas as to what's wrong with this one? Heading is too big, okay, could be Jim. Columns don't line up. Yep, absolutely, Joanne. So we've got our grid line here, and we can see that we've got an end here. This line here is perfectly on the line, and the next column it's actually above the line. So there is a very easy fix for this one, and it's something again that you don't tend to notice. You'll get your columns, and you think, oh yeah, no, that all looks really cool. I'm happy with that. But to actually see it where they're lining up, you can see that that makes such a bigger difference as far as how neat that looks on the page. So students will often forget, in fact, you know, I do too, to use the baseline grid across all columns. And to do that in InDesign, you would just go and set it as a paragraph style option, and your index and spacing you would align to grid for all lines, and that would make sure that all of your text that is set for a particular paragraph style. So if you set a paragraph style for body text, for those of you that haven't been in InDesign yet, don't worry, but when you do get to InDesign, just have this in the back of your mind that actually this is something you want to be doing. So you would set a paragraph style option to body text, you would have index and spacing, and you would align the grid to all lines, and that would allow you then to get this nice lined up paragraphs. It is also possible to do that in Illustrator, so if you're not sure, just Google that one, and when you're actually setting your text in, because with a typography cluster you have got some body text to set, and if you are going to use columns, which you know can look good, just remember that you want to make sure that they're aligned to the grid rather than being like this one where they're not, and it's a lot less, it's just higgledy-piggledy compared to that one. Okay, next one. This one's a fairly easy one, I'd imagine. What would we say would be wrong with this if you saw this on the printed page? Yep, absolutely, and there are too many fonts. So we've got way too many. It looks awful, yeah. It just looks awful. So there's way too many fonts and weights. So not only is it someone, you know, obviously whoever set this has used, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 different font types on that, but they've also used a lot of different weights. They've used a drop cap, they've got, you know, all caps, and so there's so many things wrong with that. It's not funny, but obviously that's a fairly extreme example, but certainly something to think about yourself is that, you know, how many, you know, certainly when I'm doing any typesetting, I'll make sure that I have a character style for my body text, and then a character style for headings and subheadings, and that's it. Usually my subheadings and headings are the same font, but they may just be a different tint or and a slightly different size. That could be something that I would use to show that there's a difference between a heading and a subheading, and then a body text, and that's it. I would have 3, and I would probably use no more than 2 fonts for that. So yeah, good rule of thumb. Okay, this one's a little bit out there as far as this really isn't what's wrong with this as so much, but what should we always use serif fonts for? Serif fonts are particularly useful for a certain thing. Long reading, well done, Amber. You've excellent body text, yeah. So if you're doing a large amount of laying out of text for long reading, as Amber put it, then really you want to use a serif. the reason that they're actually there is that they do help with eye strain and fatigue, in the fact that the little end points are there to actually, like we were showing, it's very similar to how we were showing with Renata and Jade's joiners and their compositional techniques. It's a leading line, and the same with the serifs. The little serifs on the end are there to actually lead your eye across the page, and it really does make things an awful lot easier. And they also, it can be argued that serifs will sit better on a baseline because they have got this sort of foot on the bottom, which will help them sort of have that balance. Absolutely, Sarah. They do lead your eye across the page a lot easier. Okay, so what do we think has happened with this particular one? Yep, absolutely. Contrast and clashing colours. So with this one is you can just be watching the similar values of colour on top of each other. So just be mindful of, if you're going to put one colour or text on top of a coloured background, the kind of values that you're looking at as far as the tint value really of each. So if you're trying to put a 50% tint on top of a 50% tint, you're going to have issues. So you just need to be careful on that, and particularly as well with colour. I mean, blue and red just are not working. But if you dropped that reddy brown colour in the background to a lighter tint, then it works perfectly fine. So what about this one? You can see Amber's typing away. Colour's too light. Same as last time, too light. Yep, too light, absolutely. So this is slightly different in the fact that what we're looking at now is a text that's on a tint. So if you reverse your text out so if you put white text onto a coloured background, and your tint of colour that you use for that background is less than 50%, it's going to struggle to print. So you always have that 50% tint in your mind as to, okay, what colour background am I putting, and I'm going to tint that down to, say, a 60%. I'll be fine. 50, it's okay. 40, no way. When you get the print back, you'd be very disappointed, as would your client. So yeah, just be mindful of that. This one, again, we see a lot of, it seems to be something that students tend to do a lot, and I'd like to see this change and for people to think a little bit differently about this one. So what do we think perhaps is the problem with this? It's a bit tricky. Center text. Absolutely, Amber. You've been doing well. You've read that typography cluster and you've taken it all in, which is brilliant to see. So we do find that a lot of people will tend to stick with centered text. I know it's an easy one to go to. However, it can be very disconnecting. And it can also be viewed as amateurish in most instances. So I would always try and steer clear of overusing centered text. Centered text in certain circumstances is going to work, and that's fine. But don't be using it all the time. It seems to be a one that people will, highlight everything and go centered, and that's the easiest one to stick with. I'd like you to start thinking a little bit more creatively than always centering your text. And it can if it's overused, it can make a design look a little bit immature. So just be mindful of that. Using text wraps can work really well. So if you've got a shape, so say you have a circle and then you you line the text around the circle and you've got your image in the middle, or around the side, and the text coming around the side. So just thinking about text wraps. So if you're a little bit stuck as to how to put your text and where to put it and how to line it up, go and have a look on the web at different ways of actually typesetting and aligning text in a document, because there is many different ways apart from centering. So I'd like to see a lot less centering happening in future for assessments. Okay, so I think the actual answer is if you start to read that text. I think the answer is actually in the writing. So different sizes. So font's too small. Left one. Okay, with this one, basically again, another thing that I think people, especially people that have come in from other courses where they've been told to set their text at 12 point. 12 point set text can really look very clunky and a little bit like a school project. I know that my daughter, when she's doing her school projects, will set at 12 because that's what the teachers have asked it for, which is fine if you've been asked for that. But what has happened, I think, from that is the fact that large body copy can start to look clunky. You don't want it. You certainly don't want to set your text any less than 7 points, but 11 and 10 point can start to look a lot more professional and more modern. So, so just be mindful of not sticking to 12 point all the time. Obviously dependent on what font you choose, but I think if you drop it down 1 or 2 points, then it starts to look a lot more professional and modern than the larger body copy. Okay, so what would we say is wrong with this one? Yep. Lame underlines, too much underlines unnecessary, way too much underlining. Absolutely. Don't see this so much from you guys, but certainly something to consider if you were given some body text from a client, say for instance, and they gave you it and it was full of underlining. I would be, as a designer, recommending that if they really have to highlight that amount of text within a body text, we consider some other element to highlight that particular text, such as another color or some other way of actually making that stand out. So, you will at times be given, a Word document where 20% of it has actually been underlined, and that's for you as a designer to then have that conversation with your client to go, hang on a minute, can we discuss the amount of underlining, and let's consider some other way of highlighting that particular part of the text. So, and that could be pulling it out. It could be actually written in the body text, but then you could have another area down below where you've actually had it highlighted and much larger. That can be a really quite effective way of if there was 2 sentences within this paragraph that needed to be highlighted, I think that might be one way I would do it, is to keep this as a nice body text, but then to have those 2 sentences here below in a larger font, maybe in a slightly different font, and almost as a sort of quotation from that particular part of body text. Okay, yeah, we get to see this one a bit, and it's a really big no-no. So what do we think possibly has gone wrong here? Yep, absolutely. Stretching, well done Sarah, well done Amber. So we've got stretched, we've also got squished. So you've written your title and it's not quite fitting, so you squish it in a bit, or it's not quite big enough, so you pull it out. Really shouldn't do that. If you're going to scale, you have to keep that font in proportion. So that was the original font. Obviously, there's been a designer behind that font has thought very long and hard about what that font and type is supposed to look like, and to actually stretch it or squish it it really shouldn't happen, especially from a designer. So be mindful if you're going to scale something that you either scale it by using your font tool to change the size, or you pull from a corner by pressing shift if it's actually been rasterized. So if it's not a vector anymore and you can only scale it from as a bitmap, then remember to pull from a corner point with the shift pressed down at the same time, and that will keep it within proportion. That's the same goes for imagery as well, but certainly text you should and fonts you should always make sure that you never squish or stretch those out. Okay, again, see these a lot, and tracking can certainly help get rid of these. Yes, well done Sarah. Orphans, and what's the other one? We've got two here. Yep, awesome, well done Emma. Orphans and widows. So here we have a little orphan and here we have a widow. So little bits of a paragraph that are either left at the bottom or left and pulled over to the next line. So really easy fix on these is just to sort your tracking out. So basically you would highlight that whole paragraph and either extend your tracking or reduce your tracking, and you will find that those orphans and widows will disappear. And again, it's just having a look at your text and just being able to spot what's going on there and going, oh, whoop, look, I've got a widow there. I can just decrease the tracking and get that to go up there, or I may increase it to bring that down here. You just need to play to see which works best for in particular situations, either decreasing or increasing that tracking. Okay, so we've got two side by side here, and there's something has happened here. Yeah, well done, Gemma. There are rivers in here, but what are causing the rivers? Why? Because this is justified without something. What has actually made that have big rivers in it? So, no hyphens. Well done, Emma. Excellent. And Amber, hyphenation. So if you're going to justify your paragraphs, your columns, you must have hyphenation on. Or you can choose ragged right, and if you're going to have ragged right, which is this one, then you would have no hyphens on. So depends on where you're laying the text out. And if you were putting it into a newspaper columns, for instance, then you would have to have justification, but make sure you have hyphenation on. If you're just placing it in some magazine layout or something like that, then you would keep your ragged right and with no hyphens. So you need to choose the situation that you're in and what works best, but remember, if you are going to justify like this, make sure that you actually have hyphens on, which will stop these big gaps from happening in your text. And if you're still getting some gaps, you're quite right, Gemma, you would need to play with your tracking to get that to lend itself to being a nicer block. And justification can work really well if you're going to do a text wrap, for instance. So if you were going to have an image and you wanted your text to wrap around that image, then you certainly would want to justify and not have a ragged right. You know, different situations stand for different things. tend to prefer ragged right for things, but there are definite situations where you want to justify so. Okay, next one. We've got two paragraphs here, and there's not necessarily a problem here, but it's probably a little bit tricky here as to what I'm actually after. But space between paragraphs, yeah. So basically, when you've got paragraphs and you're wanting to show that there is a distinct difference between the paragraphs, you need to either choose a space, like here, or you choose an indentation, but you would never go with both at the same time. And we do see sometimes that people will decide to not only have a space between their paragraphs, but also have an indentation as well. So you choose which one you want and what fits within your design the best, but you would never use both in a situation, one or the other. Okay, this is one I'm a little bit guilty of, because I learnt on a typewriter. Yes, that's how old I actually am. Well done, Joanne. I don't know if you learnt on a typewriter as well, but when I learnt on a typewriter, they actually, my type teacher told me to press spacebar twice after every full stop. And apparently this practice actually is holdover from the Victorian era, and the practice began when typewriters were introduced. Because early typewriters used monospace fonts, meaning that spaces between letters was always the same, typists used to press the spacebar twice to mimic the slightly wider space. Nowadays, because we're on computers, they're actually equipped with proportionally spaced fonts. So basically it means that the computer works out what kind of spacing you should have between your fonts. Now obviously it doesn't always get it right, and that's why we use tracking and why we use kerning, but there's no need to press spacebar twice after a full stop. So I know that I had to relearn that one myself because I used to do that quite regularly. Yeah, so just watch that there's only one space needed after that full stop, otherwise it opens it out way too much. And the last one, which you've already sort of pointed out, but we'll go there anyway. What can we see with this particular font? Yes, so we have a river that has occurred, and because this particular part of paragraph has been justified, it's ended up causing that nice amount of space that grabs your eye instantly. So just watch out for rivers, and again use your tracking to sort out any rivers that may have happened, just to either open up your text or close the text a little bit. Yeah, so those are just things to watch out for. We will put this recording on YouTube as always, so you can play it back and remind yourself. But just don't. I think, and I'm one for this. I used to be particularly. You just get excited about your whole sort of design and the imagery side of things and the colours, and text seems to be something that gets left and not really considered. So what we're asking you to do now is to really consider that typesetting and to think, you know, to look at it. Even turn all the rest of the design off. You know, if you've got it on layers, switch those layers off and just look at your typesetting and what's going wrong, where does it look good, where have you got any widows, have you got any orphans, are your columns lined up, have you aligned to the baseline, you know, those kind of considerations. And there's not many to think about, but and often it's just, you know, is it neat, is it tidy, can I read it? Those are the kind of things that you're thinking about, but it's often the things that get forgotten. And I think I suppose for myself, I'm quite a bit of a type geek, and so it tends to be, for me, I will look immediately at typesetting and instantly I see these problems, and I just think to have that in your head. Absolutely, Emma, using style guides is a must. It really is. You set your character styles for your body text and your paragraph style for your body text, and you really can't go wrong. You know, if you set, you know, your indentation that you want for your paragraphs, you're going to align everything to the baseline. You set the font that you want and the size that you want, and then you click it all into that style. Then, you know, and it's so easy. And then if there is a problem, if you just want to slightly increase your leading or slightly change the font, you only have to do it once on the style guide, and then whoom, your whole document is changed instantly. So brilliant tip. Using style guides is really important. So if you've only got a small amount of copy to do, then, you know, you don't need to use a style guide, but certainly for, you know, 4 or 5 pages of sort of, you know, newsletter or whatever, and then you can reuse those style guides as well over and over again, which is really helpful. So